Today's guest has launched dozens of online businesses and retired as a result of his success. But retirement to him and your definition of retirement might not be exactly the same. Find out how he retired and what premium single-word generic domain name was exciting enough to pull him out of retirement. Stay tuned. I have 3 short sponsor messages before we get into today's show. First, if you have a great domain name and nothing to show when people visit, you're missing out on potential advertising revenue, leads, and partnership opportunities. Nichewebsites.com can build you a site quickly with a price option to suit any need. But as their tagline says, they don't just build websites, they build businesses. Second, if you're buying or selling a domain name or a portfolio and you want an estimate of its value, Estabot.com is the place to go. Just like you'd visit Zillow.com to get an estimate of a house value, Estabot.com provides key information about the most important statistics so you can make an informed decision based on data. Finally, DNX.com is a domain name exchange that uses a reverse auction platform to provide fair market prices for quality domain names that are manually filtered by an experienced broker. At DNX.com, domain prices drop until someone decides the price is right. But don't wait too long or the domain you love might be purchased by someone else. All 3 sponsors have a clickable banner in the upper right-hand corner of DomainSherpa.com. Here's your program. Hey everyone, my name is Michael Seiger and I'm the publisher of DomainSherpa.com, the website where you come to learn how to become a successful domain name entrepreneur and investor directly from the experts. Today's guest graduated with a computer science degree, but doesn't practice computer science. He's retired, but is not relaxing on the beach. He's had health issues, but is one of the healthiest people around. And he's the director of Anthropia and publisher of Examine.com, a website that provides independent scientific information on supplements and nutrition. Today, we're joined by Sol Orwell. Sol, welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be here.
Sol, there's so much to talk about with you. I'm not even sure where to start, but I think we'll start with your professional background first.
Sure.
Some of the things that I've read about on your blog at solorwell.com include that you were in the MMO space, the massively multiplayer online gaming space and virtual currency before World of Warcraft, or right when World of Warcraft came out. You were in online directories before Google decided to slap all those directories down. You were into CSS before, when it was cool, before it became a commodity and a lot of people started doing it. And you were doing local before Google decided to do local as well. So prior to your current venture at Examine.com, in your opinion, what was your biggest professional accomplishment?
I'd have to go way back when with MMOs. I was involved in MMOs basically, when EverQuest and Diablo 2 and all those came out, which is like the early 2000s and late 1990s. And back then, the concept of taking real money for what was virtual and just a bit of binary code on someone's servers was quite insane. I mean, even now today, like, I was never a big MMOer myself, but the idea that you're a busy individual, you don't have the time to, get the level 100 sword or whatever, and I know some kids who do, and, I pay them $10 to buy their sword, and then you pay me $100 to buy this sword. I mean, it was just one of those, when you're still in the industry, you're thinking, like, is this really happening? Every day you'd wake up and you go, are people actually paying me this much money to have these virtual items to play this video game, and why is the video game itself not involved? Right? I mean, the industry's now been around for 15 plus years and it's evolved a lot. Gaming companies are involved in it now and whatnot. So it was really interesting for us way back when to be involved in selling these items and these currency. And what we did a bit differently than everyone else was doing was that we started becoming part of the community. So we started buying websites, we started building our own websites, and we were never afraid to say, hey, we're gold sellers, which is what they used to be called back in the day, right? And we were kind of like, yeah, we sell currency, we sell these items, there's definitely a for-profit aspect to it. But if you want to know how to be the best, Collating possible, the website that we run, that we're paying for and are basically subsidizing with our sales, is the single best website you'll find on platins and whatnot. So, even now, I haven't kind of been involved in that industry for like 7, 8 years now. But even now, looking back at it, it's just one of those things where you just shake your head and you go, those were the heady days when the internet was new, where the idea of even paying $10 a month was kind of crazy. And one of the fun things about MMOs was, their peak audience, their most busy day of the year was actually New Year's, because that was what was important to people, right? So I have to go with MMOs as kind of being the most bizarre, I think would be the right word to use in terms of what I've been involved with.
Yeah. So you had your business was buying low, selling high. So maybe it was people that came back from war and they were, on leave at home. I remember reading an article in entrepreneur.com or Inc. magazine or something like that, where people would come home, they'd spend 6 months off, maybe they'd train at a base in the United States, and they play a lot of MMO games, and then they would get their orders, and they would head back out someplace, and they would have all of this armor or gold or whatever, and they would need to sell it. So they'd come to a marketplace like yours to sell it.
Exactly. I mean, we were basically middlemen. We were never involved in either acquiring or any of the direct parts, let's say, right? We were just kind of we were in a transition period, right? We basically went from A to B, and we were the middlemen that made it happen. And pretty much anybody who was a busy professional, right? There were lawyers, there were doctors, like you said, people on leave, people who didn't have the time to invest out. I mean, these people who are playing these video games, right? They will easily spend 8 to 12 hours a day, which is not. I mean, to you and I, that sounds like if I had that much time, I just sleep. That's what I do, but. They love this, and eventually they'd want to, because, these online games are different, right? If you're a platinum, which means you're like a warrior and a healer, and if you want to be a healer, like the game changes. So eventually, let's say you kind of win the game and you're bored of it, and then you want to restart, well, what do you do? So we would buy their full character, we'd buy their item, and then, we'd flip it over to somebody who didn't have the time.
So you said that you were a marketplace, that you didn't actually do the purchase. Would you purchase it for, X and then own it for a while and then sell it to X plus Y, or sell it for X plus Y to some other person?
Well, part of the fun with this was that there was a lot of technical legalities between it. So you were never allowed to actually sell the items themselves. You had to sell the time that you used to acquire the items.
Oh, wow.
Or what you would do is, let's say they didn't allow you to sell currency. So you'd create a new character. The new character would meet up with who's selling the currency. You'd put the currency into the new character, and then you'd sell the entire character off to whoever was buying it, and then they would transfer the money and stuff like that. So there was a lot of, depending on how they had the game set up, with the TOS, like the terms of service were like, you figure out your ways to make it happen. But yeah, we nowadays, I mean, it's become kind of, let's say, a professional organization. People have staffs of 20, 30, 40, 50 that are in China or Mexico or some other third world country where labor is pretty low. And basically these people play professionally. They harvest the gold and then they sell it directly to the end user instead of dealing with buying and selling. They're only in selling. So we did not do that kind of stuff. We were just involved in the buying and selling part.
Gotcha. And what was the exit from that business, Sol? Did you sell it to somebody else? Did you sell it to your partners? How did you get out of that business?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. It's in my nature not to stay around in one industry for too long. I like the challenge. I like trying something out new. And so in my case, I had a co-founder, let's say, a partner with me. He was kind of the technical aspect, and I dealt with everything else. So I eventually kind of sold my portion over to him, and then he, at the same time, he merged his operations with a well-funded company that was in other games. So they kind of merged and became like a super website, let's say, that would sell these kind of items. And that's that.
Was that your most successful exit? Did that give you the most freedom when it comes to working and choosing when you work?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of revenue, definitely that crushed it. It was, again, right back in the day where margins were much easier, right? Traffic acquisition was the hard part. This is back when AdWords did not even exist.
Yeah.
And that was a baby, right? So it was one of those where the margins hadn't been squeezed. Like most things are online, or you have to work a lot more on your brand and kind of your following and stuff like that. This is before even Facebook existed, right? So in terms of amount of effort put in and getting your money back, that was definitely the high side for me.
What was the revenue per month or per year at the heyday of the MMO business that you helped run?
I mean, I'd say we were clearing at least seven figures a year, and that would be again, that was our margin, let's say. Um, Actual revenue was, of course, a lot higher. Even then, we were never the biggest ones. We were never, a part of it for again me is just kind of a little bit of laziness, kind of just dabbling, kind of enjoying. I do know, I knew all the other big guys very personally, and I mean, the biggest guys were easily generating eight, and even some of them were worth nine figures in terms of how much money they were pulling off
Wow.
online currency and virtual games. Yeah.
Very cool. And I also read that you previously owned beat.com and webmaster.org. Is that a couple of other websites that you ran for a time?
Yeah, that was actually that was my entryway into the domain space. Again, I was always dabbling. I was always doing interesting things. One of my favorite ones actually was, so I bought the domain elook.org, and there are all these various free databases online. And I purchased them. We're talking about like $100, $200, nothing expensive. So I purchased them all. I put them on this one website, elook.org, and there was like a search for everything that was on it, right? So there's recipes, nutrition, video game database, whatever, right? And then I hired a student in high school, and his full-time job for the summer was to submit listings to dmoz.org, right? dmoz.org, for those who don't remember anymore, was, let's say, the dominant directory, and it's still around.
Yep.
It was originally owned by Mozilla, which made Firefox and Netscape, and now it's owned by AOL. And Google used to love it, right? Google's issue always is to figure out who can I trust in terms of who they're looking to. And DMOZ was one of those ones that they fully trusted. They, in fact, had it duplicated on their own. On the subdomain directory.google.com was a clone of the aforementioned DMOZ. So what I had was this kid just submitted every single possible listing from our site into DMOZ. And by the end of the summer, we had like 300 some listings on DMOZ.
Wow.
So just to let you know, even one was considered a success, right? If you have two or three, like you were a roller or something. And so, I took that domain I bought for maybe $100, $200. It was a couple $1,000s at the student for the summer, and then that site with its 300 plus DMOZ listings was getting like 20, 30,000 visitors a day. And, and then I flipped it for like 40 or 50,000, right? So it was kind of, it was that kind of mindset that brought me in a domain. So beat.com was one of those domains I bought and flipped pretty much instantly within 6 months. Webmaster.org, I was actually building something out, but again, right, something else, I don't even remember now what. Something else came that was interesting to me, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to have any time on webmaster.org. Let's flip it and sell it. So, yeah, it's just, that was my introduction to domains. I was never a big domainer per se, but I always, understood the value of domains and kind of what they can do for you.
And did you understand that because you, I believe, got your degree in computer science, so you understood how the internet worked? And am I correct that you got your computer science degree?
Computer engineering.
Computer engineering, okay.
As we look down upon computer scientists.
Exactly. They're just writing code. You're building this computer.
Exactly. And with systems and all these other big architectural words. In the context of domains, I was a little bit cynical compared to most of the domainers, but I was more optimistic compared to like non-domainers.
Right.
At the end of the day, right, especially nowadays, branding is everything. Right? I mean, we look at auctions, for example. eBay has nothing to do with the word auction, and even if you have auction.com, you might work on a niche, but you're not gonna, slap them off their podium. There's something else, right? There's classifieds that have hurt them and whatnot. So I always understood the value of domains in terms of, hey, it's easy to remember, right? I mean, hey, I can remember X domain, webmaster.org. I mean, again, it's a .org, but it had this very memorable domain name. So did it bring me much traffic? No. Did it directly contribute to my success? Maybe, maybe not. But I knew that indirectly it was easy to remember. The ability to type it in and whatnot was a lot easier. So, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of throwing $200,000 at a domain and thinking this is going to be my success. Domain should be like 10, 20% of your budget, maybe. There's still a lot more to be done, but if your budget's big enough to get an awesome domain, then absolutely, right? Like, you look at hotels.com, they're not successful just because they have hotels.com, but they advertise it everywhere, right? They spend a lot of money pushing the domain, and that kind of works and helps with each other.
Yeah. So how many domain names do you have today in your portfolio?
Not much, honestly. in terms of like .com and .net.org, I maybe like 100. Nothing very valuable. I do have a nice collection of Filipino domains and New Zealand domains. This is an odd accumulation. New Zealand was always kind of where I wanted to end up in. So New Zealand, I mean, these domains that I own in New Zealand and Philippines, they're not meant for, let's say, holding and selling. My New Zealand ones, I ideally like to develop them down the road once I have a lot more time. And in the Philippines, my number two, who kind of runs operations, deals with the service, all of that, he's an American who lives in the Philippines. And so our goal has always been, we have contributed, sites that are owned by Filipinos and run by Filipinos in their space. And we just happen to have timed it right. And I think it was in 2003 or 2004 where we kind of picked up a lot of the best .com, .ph, and .ph domains they have.
Gotcha. And so for the New Zealand one, I think, a lot of people want to go and retire in New Zealand. It's a beautiful country. My wife and I spent a month there a few years ago, and actually my brother-in-law's a Kiwi, and it's just a beautiful area. So are you planning on, starting a windsurfing company there? So you own something like windsurfing.co.nz or?
I honestly, well, the thing is I love the outdoors. I'm a hardcore camper. Like I do, portage campings. I've done survival camping. We've done it where you go into like 3 feet of snow and you don't bring a tent. And so you have to build your own kind of like emergency lean-to, that kind of stuff. So that's the appeal of New Zealand to me. And so in that context, I mean, again, this was stuff I did maybe like 8-10 years ago, was, okay, eventually I'll move to New Zealand and then I will build some kind of internet. Back then, that's when the roll-ups were big and popular, right? Internet.com and the name slipped me, right? But there's now this Whale Shark Media that owns owns Deals.com and owns Retail Me Not, which is the juggernaut in the coupon space. There's also the company that owns web hosting Talk that had a lot of webmaster sites. Again, this is like 10 years ago when roll-ups were getting popular.
Right.
So my goal was like I own sports, I own movies, .co.nz, lawyers, attorneys, stuff like that. So my goal was always to have like a largest internet-based company that deals in a lot of spaces. I don't know if I'll ever get down to that. But I love movies. I love sports. I hate lawyers. Maybe I can stick to them somehow. So that's why I've kept those, and then we'll see, what happens.
Gotcha.
I mean,
so you're just going to hold on to it, and if life takes you to New Zealand, you've got some domain names that you can now build a business on top of.
Exactly. Like I have absolutely no intent. I've sold one Filipino and New Zealand domain in the last 10 years. So it's not even as an investment vehicle to me. It's as something, one day I'd like to be able to build it out and say, I mean, I've reached a stage right now, at least in my life, where being cool or doing cool things are more important. So yeah, hopefully I can do something cool with them later.
So I went to Anthropia.com and I can see that you've got Examine.com and you've also got a business listed on there called DealCatch.com. Yes. What is DealCatch?
DealCatch, so Entropy.com is pretty much, let's say, defunct. I just put up the domain. I mean, I've had that again since I incorporated in 2003. 2002, 2003. So DealCatch was back when daily deals were hot and gaining steam. And because of my experience in local search, I knew that white labeling was a big part of success, right? So basically, local.com is kind of the juggernaut in it now. But you white label your search results to local directly to newspapers, to radio stations, to TV stations, and whatnot. So when deals were gaining steam, I built an aggregator for myself, and friends of mine liked the aggregator, so I built out the aggregator a bit more, and that was what became DealCatch. And the idea was eventually to white label and whatnot, but I got sidetracked with Examine, and then Daily Deals kind of imploded on themselves. Like, it's amazing how much Groupon and Living Social used to pay versus what they pay now. So I guess I'm glad I got sidetracked by something else.
Yeah, so it is built and it continues to harvest deals, right? Because I went to DealCatch and I went to Seattle and I saw deals that looked like they were active. Is it still active?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's absolutely active. I mean, we send out like 50, 60,000 emails a day. So it's being used by people. And of course, it's funding itself just fine. But it's just one of those projects that there's not, like, it's running. There's not a lot of effort needed to delve into it. The number of daily deal companies that are coming up now is pretty much zero. More of a concern is ones that are dying. You got to make sure you remove them, or that are no longer related to local, or that are more just online deals. But yes, I guess that's a decent example of something that runs itself, that's profitable on its own, and that does not require. I mean, other than depositing commission junctions checks and whoever checks, like my daily involvement with it is pretty much zero.
Yeah. Do you have to determine which deal sites are going defunct so you can pull them out of your scraping process or your
Alarms
partners?
and systems set in place, right? So, hey, there's no deals for a week. What's going on, right? Is it dead? Is something going on? Hey, wait a minute, right? Like the IP has changed. Does that mean they've just rechanged their hosting, or does that mean they've gone out of service? Is it a park page? Parking companies at times get pretty smart, or some of these domain speculators, right? They buy up domains, but they see what's being hit and they make sure that it's giving a proper response. So,
Yeah.
there's like 5, 6, 7 different measures we have in place, and if any 2 or 3 or plus alarms are triggered, then you do a manual review. But even then, I don't do that, right? It's again my second in command in the Philippines. That's his job to make sure everything runs
Gotcha.
smooth.
All right. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit and move from your businesses to your retirement. So, we've had a conversation, a pre-interview before, and Chris Crowther actually introduced us, said that I need to talk to you because you've got this lifestyle that's fantastic, and you work when you want to work, and maybe you work a few hours a day, maybe you don't. How is it that you've had, it seems like a lot of successes in the online space, but I can't find any indication that you've had like a $20 million sale of a company or something like that. How do I reconcile the fact that you're retired and you work when you want to work and you go to the park and you read when you want to read, you don't answer to anybody, you have this freedom, but I haven't seen a enormous exit?
Well, I mean, the real essence of I guess is what is retirement to you? So I'm an immigrant. I moved to Canada when I was 14, and so I've seen. I'm very lucky, right? I mean, I was lucky. I was born to my specific father, who was able to get out and whatnot. I've seen people with a lot less, and so my definition of retirement is not necessarily that I'm wealthy or that I'm even rich. Is that I have a very nice and stable income that doesn't require me to put more effort into building it if I don't want to, right? So. I've had VCs come after me. I've been in that lucky position where, I've rejected over a dozen VCs that want to invest in various things I've done. So yeah, I don't have a big exit, but that's because that's not something that's driven me, right? So, I could have $50 million. I might not, right? But I could have it today if I was willing to put in those 14-hour days and all that. But to me, what's more important is autonomy and being able to do what I want to do when I want, right? So in 2 weeks, I'm going on vacation for 3 weeks to Peru. I don't have to worry about, why am I going, or, customer support, or I have to manage a team or anything like that. So that's what retirement is to me. So, I worked my ass off. To use that phrase, I honestly did. When I was in university, I went in with a full scholarship. I lost that bad boy within the first semester because I was focused on building my business. And I spent 10, 12, 14-hour days. I've done that. But when you hit that fork in the road where, hey, do I want to be making millions a year? Which, if you want to, that's cool. I have nothing against that. Or in my case, if you're making a decent chunk of change, and you don't have expenses, you don't have debts, you don't have anything really. Like, I don't live a very flashy life. I don't even have a car. I live in downtown Toronto. I love walking. I love biking. That's part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, retirement became quite easy, right? It's like, am I making enough money? Do I have to put in a lot of effort into continue making this money? No, I don't. So can I do what I want when I want? Now, yes, I can. And it was those decisions, that thought process that led me to saying, I'd rather be retired and be able to do what I want than not. And let me be very clear. For the past 6 months, I've worked my ass off. I'm kind of off that retirement chain. It's not making me a dime in money. In fact, it's lost me quite a lot of money so far. But it's just one of those things where, again, I was talking about making something cool. So I've got the time, and I don't treat it as a job. It's not something, hey, if I want to go for 3 weeks, I will, right? I've vacationed at least 6 to 8 weeks this year already. So if I'm taking 2 to 3 months off a year to do what I want, I think that's a decent balance.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would think that's a decent balance. In July 2011, you wrote on your blog that you went from about 35% body fat to 12%. And you wrote that you're scheduled to hit 9% in the next 6 weeks. What's your body fat percentage right now, Sol?
It is 10.2, I have to admit. I recently had it DEXA, which is like an MRI. I'm an engineer, so I track all that stuff. In fact, I just got my blood test results back today for my yearly ones. Um, yeah, I'm a little bit ashamed I didn't hit it, but I gotta admit I love food too much. So in terms of priority, that kind of fell to the wayside.
Still,
So.
that's pretty significant. I saw on your blog a before and after picture, and I can't even recognize you as being that same person.
Yeah. I think it was the haircut. Everyone who sees that picture, especially a mixed reference to my questionable haircut. I believe that the haircut and the a little bit more grooming and the slightly better fitting clothes has done a lot more.
Yeah.
I'll admit I've also had jaw surgery, even though in that after picture I hadn't. But I needed that because like I fractured my 8 front teeth when I was a kid, and it was time to fix that. Um, but yeah, I mean, so I was in Argentina and then I was in Manhattan. And in Argentina, they let you online delivery of ice cream, and it was extremely cheap. And you order like half a liter of this, half a liter of that. So it was like dulce de leche con brownie and chocolate and whatnot. And they deliver to you within the next 15 minutes, and you just eat it all that same day because you're gonna have to repeat the process tomorrow because you're supporting the economy or whatnot. So there was a lot of unhealthy eating that was involved. Yeah, I came back to Toronto. I cleaned up my diet. I focused on being a little bit healthier, lifting weights and whatnot, and that was eventually what led me to Examine, right? So it was more of a my hobby became my passion, became, hey, let's build something cool again.
So
Yeah.
I know people that take supplements and they swear by them. I used to be one of those guys. I used to, when I was training for triathlons, I was doing a lot of lifting. I was taking a lot of supplements because you can eat, but you want to make sure that you're getting all the nutrients that your body needs in order to, grow and grow stronger. And I remember how much money they were. The energy drinks, the hydration drinks, like everything involved. How much do you spend on supplements per month, do you think?
I don't actually spend a lot. My one weakness is, I mean, I like so at any given time I'll have like 6 different whey proteins at my place for different flavors.
Mm-hmm.
So I like mixing them up with Greek yogurt or whatnot, or even sometimes when I'm having cereal, like I'll just store in the milk. So I like the taste, which is why I spend money on them, on these whey proteins. Do I need them? Not at all. I mean, I could just eat. I mean, I love like eating meat and all that too anyway, so I can get my protein that way too. I just happen to like the peanut butter flavor or the cinnamon flavor or whatnot. In terms of actual supplements, I mean, yeah, it's there's a lot of money spent, on useless stuff. And part of what we're very proud of is that on our site we don't actually sell any supplements ourselves. We have no affiliation with any supplement companies. And one of the things we'd love to be able to do is make a dent in the entire supplement industry. So an easy example is glutamine is sold as a muscle builder. And they they'll say, hey, scientific research shows glutamine will make your muscle cells bigger, bigger, bigger. And two things. So one, glutamine is a $600 million a year industry, which is, for one amino acid, that's quite something. But the other beautiful thing about the scientific research was that it was done in petri dishes. So they were injecting glutamine directly into muscle cell tissue, and then muscle cells would grow. But in the real world, when you and I ingest glutamine, our small intestines love glutamine, and they basically sequester it all for themselves. So none of it actually ever gets to your muscle cells. The only two exceptions are if you're doing like ultra marathons, we're talking about like 50 miles or longer at one time, then like the small intestines run out of glutamine reservoirs, so they need more. It's not like they'll help your muscles grow, it's that they'll strip your muscles of it. And the other thing is if you are a severe burn victim, and we're talking about if you are in the hospital ICU burn victim, that's the only other time you need glutamine. So the idea that I can make a dent, or we can make a dent in the $600 million industry that is a complete waste for at least $550 million of that, that's kind of what excites me. That's kind of what got me into supplementation, to be able to say, hey, this is all a waste of your money. You don't need these supplements, and we will show you what can work. But in general, these general recommendations of multivitamins and this and that, It's almost like a
Yeah.
Ponzi scheme is what I say.
Yeah. And how big, if glutamine is 600 million by itself, zero point 0.6 billion per year, how much is all of the supplements?
Well, I mean, there are estimates for 10 to 15 billion a year.
Yeah.
Part of it, of course, though, is do you consider those meal replace Slim Fast? Do you consider that a supplement or do you consider that a meal replacement, right? So in the context of me using whey protein, is that me using it as a supplement or as, a flavoring
Right.
agent, for example? So there's a bit of also, vagueness in terms of how you use it. But yeah, I would say 10 to 15 billion dollars is a very reasonable number to put on how much is spent on supplements,
Yeah.
and at least, 2/3 of that I'd wager is a waste
Yeah.
of money. And if we can make a dent like that, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that's enormous. All right, so this is really where I want to spend a bulk of the time is on examine.com. So I want to start from the beginning so people can see the evolution to where you are today, Saul. When did you actually buy the domain name examine.com?
So Chris, our mutual friend, him of dnx.com and all that. We had talked about okay. So I was getting pretty healthy, and I realized that there's a lot of these smart people on these forums and message boards and whatnot, but you lose that knowledge within the week, right? Nobody's going through,
and it gets buried, and
yeah,
there are a bunch of idiots, quote unquote, or my word, that get on there that confound the discussion about what's useful and what's not useful.
yeah. There's a lot of idiots, absolutely true. And when smart people come out and they write a long essay, let's say saying, this is why you don't need glutamine, they're not going to be partial to writing it again, right? And that information was getting lost. There's a lot of knowledge getting lost, and I'm a very active participant in these various areas. And so there was this guy who was graduating from dietetics, and I said, listen, you can get your PhD whenever you want. Why don't you and I build something cool? And so then the hunt came. Hey, what kind of domain do we want? What kind of representation do we want when people think of what we do, right? So our original envisionment was simply we're going to research supplements. We're going to build a supplement database, and we might get into exercise and stuff like that. And so in that context, we did not want something too specific, like let's say supplements.com or something like that. We wanted something that was kind of giving you a sense that we're looking into the research. We're trying to make sense of what is and what isn't. And even though our general space is health and we're starting off in supplements, it's not the only thing we're necessarily going to stick to. And so that's when I was talking to Chris, and Chris was like, hey, I got examine.com. And pretty much that was it. We talked about it, and I think 24 to 48 hours later, it was a done deal. And that actually was all done when I was in Panama, where I was hanging out with him, and I said, hey, this is what we were talking about, like, what's next, or what are some projects you're going to do. So I always had like 3 or 4 at the same time, and I mentioned this was one of them, and that's kind of where the domain name came from.
Gotcha. I see in namebio.com that it sold May 12th, 2011 for $41,000. Was that your purchase?
Yes, that was my purchase.
Okay. And I also see that it was under Who Is to Media Options, Andrew Rosner's company. Was he a middleman to do the deal, or was he?
I honestly don't know.
Don't know.
Not even a no comment. I honestly don't know. It might have been under Drew's. I don't know. Maybe he was hosting it. Maybe what was going on. I don't know. But I do know that was Chris's domain when I bought it from him.
Gotcha.
Chris and I know well enough that between him and I, there wasn't even an escrow. I just sent the money. I got the domain done. End of story. It was never like I just have the funds clear. Like I've known him for like 10 years also, right? So there was that comfort level. So we got the domain, and then basically one of the
Hey, so let me stop you for a second. How did you determine that $41,000 was a fair price to pay for examine.com, a word that has a decent amount of search volume, but not a lot? It doesn't really define a product or service.
Right.
And would be useful for a website that has supplement information, maybe some medical information or some exercise information. It doesn't really it doesn't stick out to me as like, yes, that is the keyword defining domain name.
So the thought process was basically that in fitness, especially in nutrition, there's a lot of what we call bro science hanging around. But bro science is kind of like it's a very colloquial phrase. It wasn't something that we want to associate with our primary brand, right? So there's all this information, all this garbage, all these people who these superficial looks at studies and whatnot, and they make these big claims, right? So it's very common in a study if you read it. Like if you go to PubMed, which is kind of like a clearinghouse, it'll have what their hypothesis was, a little bit on their methodology, and a conclusion, and that's it. But what's really important is you have to actually go into the full paper. You have to go to the methodology. You have to see, variances matter, right? If the average gain was a kilo, let's say, but people lost 15 and other people gained 15, right? You don't really like. There's a lot of nuances that you have to get when you actually go into the papers, and our motto or our approach was always that we were going to examine the evidence. That was kind of evidence-based fitness is a phrase that's become very popular now, but 3 years ago it wasn't something that anyone really talked about much. So our viewpoint was, we don't want to use the word evidence-based. We don't want to be like, hey, look at us, we're all bourgeois and using big words and whatnot. It's that we want to examine what the evidence says. And so in that context, examine.com made complete sense. And it was also one of those that had the potential to become a verb, right? Like, hey, do you have any question about creatine? Examine it. It was a very easily kind of led into that idea. And I'll admit, right, every time I start on a project, I've always grand visions of what it's going to do and what it's not going to do. So that was part of it. And the inverse of it was, even if the website was a failure and I was stuck with the domain, is it worth 40,000? Is it worth 35,000? Worth 45,000? Even if I take a slight loss, that's acceptable. At that time, Chris had two other domains that he was going kind of in a package, and when I found out he had Examine, it just made so much sense to me in that context of what are we doing? How will we be eventually used as? How will we refer to as? And in fact, that Examine it that I mentioned gets used a lot. People ask on Twitter, all these from Men's Health to whatever fitness models. Someone will tweet at them saying, hey, what do you think of Rhodiola rosea? What do you think of vitamin D? Whatever. And they go, hey, you should just examine. And they don't even mention our domain. They don't mention anything. But that examine has become a phrase that is used by people in fitness. So it was a bit of a gamble in that way, but it was worthwhile. And in my head, I always thought I could flip it for 30,000 if I needed to. Yeah. So was it worth that extra bit of premiumness? Sure, why not? So
and when you looked at the domain name, clearly you looked at supplements.com, which is actually owned by Nature Made today. I'm not sure if they owned it back then. But did you ever think about, like, did you make that analysis in your head? Should I go for a keyword-specific domain name? Should I like brandable or like supplements.com? Or should I go for an alternate generic that's like supplements.info, which you could have bought, or My Supplements, or My Examine? Did you ever consider those different options before you settled down on examine.com?
So I definitely considered, let's say, the pure generic, supplements.com, let's say fitness.com, whatever, right? Those were absolutely considered. But again, my concern was that we would get eventually pigeonholed. And it's a good thing we didn't go with supplements because we talk about nutrition a lot and we would have, again, pigeonholed us. In terms of stuff like My Supplements or supplements.info, absolutely not. Especially nowadays, in the last 4 or 5 years, I cut my teeth doing SEO way back when you could literally buy one page rank 9 or 8 link in your top 5 on Google for whatever, right? So nowadays, especially SEO is very brand based, very, how many, they might not outright say it, it might not have an outright impact on it, but how many Facebook likes you have, how many Twitter followers you have, how are people interacting with your brand and whatnot. And stuff like My Supplements and supplements.info, there's absolutely no allure to me. I'm a .com guy straight through and through. CCTLDs are the only other attraction, but since we weren't local, there was no sense in buying a CCTLD or buying anything even smart or funny, right? Let's say there's .ts or supplement there was none. There was no appeal in that for me either. It was just I need something that can be branded that makes sense in the context of what we're going to do. And thus, examine.com was the one that made sense.
Gotcha. So you bought it around May 2011. How long did it take you to build the first version of examine.com?
So right now, we're in version 5.5. And so the original version, especially if you go to archive.org, you can look it up. It was very simplistic. It It was very easy. I'm a big fan of rapid prototyping, about getting a site up instead of making it perfect and sinking tens and tens and thousands of dollars. I knew that our bread and butter was going to be our knowledge. It was going to be the information we had. At the same time, I also knew that my co-founder was still a little bit young and he needed time. He needed a lot of that practical kind of experience. And so building something this huge, envisioning this massive thing, while nice for the eventual plan, it would not have helped us, right? We needed feedback. We needed feedback now. So I built up a very simple system. He started inputting information, and kind of as he ran into issues, as he ran into, how do I manage this, or this is becoming a bit cumbersome, I would iterate and then evolve. And then as we got a bit bigger, I think we hit 500 visitors a day. That's when version 2 came, then version 3, and then all that kind of eventual progression to what we are right now. And version 6 is the next big one for next year, March, April, which would be our full 3-year anniversary, let's say. So yeah, it was a very iterative process.
How long did it take you to build version 1, which allowed your partner to input information, which is the key to examine.com, having all that information in a database that allows you to display it and organize it and,
Right. Oh, a couple of weeks. It wasn't very fancy. I've done websites like, so, didn't have to spend any effort building up a user system because I knew what I was doing anyway, right? So that took maybe a couple of hours, if even. So it was more just figuring out what kind of areas of supplementation we wanted to talk about. And that's morphed so much since we first started. But the general ones that we want to talk about, doing some markup code, making sure everything interlinks, a very, very, very simple design, just again to get the data out, even get Google indexing it. That's kind of, so a couple of weeks maximum, maybe even a week to 10 days.
Did you build the website yourself, Sol?
Absolutely.
So you coded it yourself, even though you're a hardware guy. You came down to the software level. And
in a computer engineer, we have the skill set for both. So, hardware, software, virtualware, whatever VMware you want to call it, we can deal with all of those. So I did have to stoop a little bit. But yeah, no.
Why did you decide to code your own rather than just using WordPress off the shelf or Joomla or?
It was just so much overhead, and then eventually, if it does grow, then you have to grow out of their system, and you have to kind of fit. I mean, at the essence of it, we're essentially a database site. He inputs data to a database, and then we kind of play with it, and then we spit it back out, right? So WordPress content-based systems would make no sense. And so essentially, you could even say that our first version was a very simple interface between the raw data and what you saw. And then as we grew and, we started interlinking papers and saying, hey, if you're looking at subject X, you might want to read about Y, or here's an FAQ question on this, and you might want to look into this supplement. That was all natural progression. And the other really important reason I like programming myself, or I like being involved, is, you see things that you wouldn't normally understand. Right. So as I was programming and thankfully I knew my supplement information and all that, but as I was programming, like, it would make sense to do this because it'll make his life easier when he wants to do this. Right. So being on the ground level, I think, is really important when you start. Now I have a CTO, he's doing all of V6, we're going over the specs list. Now I don't have to deal with it. But when you first start, I'm very happy that I've got a jack of all trades kind of skill set, so I can do everything, fully appreciate what's working, what's not working, before I bring in specialized people who kind of take it to the next level.
Yeah, makes sense. And I like the way how you've done iterations. I think a lot of people, especially domain owners that don't know a lot about development, think that they need to do, what's commonly referred to as a waterfall process, where I need everything to work right from the beginning, and here's everything that needs to be done, and I'm going to go spec it for somebody to work on, and then halfway through, the developers lose track of the entire process, and it's just too big. You launched small, you got it up and running, you started to store data in the database, you had an interface, and you displayed it so Google could see that you're growing over time, you've got great content, and other people can find it useful.
Absolutely. We had shared notes between my co-founder and I as we grew. We were very solicited user feedback all the time. I mean, especially now when I look back and see where we are and where we're headed towards, right? It's not, you can see things that we wanted, but you can also see so many things that we had never conceived that we'd have to deal with. Right. And so, I don't understand when people spend all this effort into these huge projects, especially nowadays when you have APIs and white labels and all this kind of stuff. Getting a site live, maybe, it took me a little bit quicker, but a couple of months and you should have something out there that you can then start driving traffic to, right? You have to know what's working, what's not.
Mhm.
I'm a very analytical guy, right? So we know, like we're using Crazy Egg, we use Optimizely, we use Quadraro, we use Mixpanel, we use all these different softwares to know what people are doing, what they're finding useful. Are they clicking on these links? Are they not? Did I have that when I first started? No. Did I start building that in as as we iterated, as we got simplistic feedback from Facebook, from email, from Reddit, all these sites? Yes. Are we a lot more sophisticated now? Absolutely. Right? But just to get off the bat and getting some feedback is so critical, and it just boggles my mind how people have these huge condominiums that they want to build when these companies didn't build a condo their first time, right? They built some house or they built a shed and then they worried about the condo down the road. So
Right. All right. So let me ask you, you paid $41,000 for the domain name. You had understanding of how to develop it. You did the development yourself, so there was no cost to develop the website. You got a website hosting plan. You coded it yourself, and that was working. And then you had a partner that you mentioned. What's your partner's name?
Curtis Frank.
So Curtis came on, and he was studying, diet and health, and so he's sort of the subject matter expert. You were too,
Yeah.
but you used him primarily as the subject matter expert who was putting the
Yeah.
content into the database.
Right.
Was he a partner right from the beginning? Did you pay him a salary? How did that work?
So the thing with me, especially with the health, was that I was part of these various websites. People knew who I was. People knew, like, I've never been shy about who I am. And so people knew that I'd done this kind of stuff, and they knew I'd lost a lot of weight. And him and I would have a lot of discussions, and I'd ask him for clarification. What does ghrelin do, which is a hormone? What does leptin do? All that kind of stuff. So he knew that I knew more than, let's say, 99.9%. Right? He might be at the 6th significant digit. I might be at the 3 significant digit. But him and I knew each other. And so when the time came where I said, hey, we should build something that holds a repository, right? He had this understanding of who I was. I wasn't some guy coming in out of nowhere saying, yo, you should work with me. It was, hey, I have these skill sets. You have this skill. Why don't we work together?
Mm-hmm.
And his reality was a bit different than mine, right? So I didn't need to make money off Examine.com. He obviously needed a source of revenue. And so, of course, he was a co-founder, but we scaled it so that the primary revenue in the beginning all went to him and whatnot. And even though I was, let's say, in charge of business and I almost controlled his salary and all that kind of stuff, I knew I was taking a loss for a year, for 2 years, because, this is one of those long-term plays. We weren't selling supplements, stuff like that. So he has, of course, ownership, but he also had, now he definitely does, but he had a stable revenue off the bat, so he wouldn't say, hey, I'm just being used also by this guy and I'm not making any money. And then, a year down the road, he tries to pull something fast on me.
Gotcha.
So, gotcha.
And so how did you structure that with respect to the equity in Examine.com? Since you put up all the money to begin with, do you own most of the equity, or did you share some of the equity with him to begin with?
Oh, no, I absolutely shared the equity, and we also had a very clear understanding that we weren't, again, selling out or having an exit was not our primary plan. We've had already people knocking on our door, telling companies especially would love to be able to plaster their ads on our site. Just from the momentum of what we built, they'll make their money back times 10. So with him, basically there was a lot of sliding scales. It was like these long, complicated, it eventually became a long, complicated formula. But the idea was almost, let's say, the first 10,000, all the money would go towards him, and the next 50,000 it would start splitting and stuff like that. And so even though I put money in, eventually once we hit certain benchmarks, the number one priority would then be to eliminate any debt that I had to incur, any interest that we had set, relative to prime and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of structure to it, so there was never any question, and there was no situation where a person would say, hey, I'm not getting my money's worth. Mm-hmm. And then, you do examples, right? So let's say our revenues in 3 years, let's say our revenue is $1,000 a month versus $10,000 a month versus $50,000 a month. How will it play out? So he had a full understanding of what his upside was, what his downside was, what his potential was. Also, in terms of personal brand building, right? Fitness is a lot about personal brand. Mm-hmm. We agree that in magazines and such things, the quote would be attributed to him, right? So he would be able to say that he was in Men's Health magazine and that he was in Forbes magazine and all these kind of things.
Mhm.
Whereas I wouldn't be able to say, I can say, Examine.com was, but not that I was. So there's also that implicit value that he's been able to build up his own brand.
Mhm.
And so, when he speaks at conferences now, it's partly because he's been in this magazine or that magazine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's stuff too.
That makes perfect sense. So you got the website up and running. Curtis is putting content in. You're building the system. Google is indexing it. They're finding more content. Traffic is slowly growing. Did you, and clearly you had a relationship, you had a financial relationship with Curtis established such that he'd get whatever revenue was coming in up to a certain point. How were you making revenue in the early days?
So in the early days, it was basically we were linking to Amazon results for our for the specific supplement. So for example, if we were looking at vitamin D, we would link to Amazon's results for vitamin D. We had like all these tags around it that said, we don't recommend any brand. This is why we're linking to Amazon, because we do need revenue to fund something like this. Part of the process was always, once you're big enough, then you can build products, you can kind of, do consulting and whatnot and start getting involved in academia and pharma and all that. So those were always a long-term plans, whereas Amazon would bring in the revenue and let us grow from that. So that was our initial. I think if I look at every single Amazon dollar we made, I think I got 2 cents, 1 cent, and he got all the rest, which I'm okay with.
Okay, I thought you were saying Amazon was only paying you 2 cents. You made a decent amount of revenue from Amazon, just commissions from referral links, right?
It was a livable wage. I mean, he was he didn't have to live with his parents, for example, and whatnot. So it was driving enough revenue. But again, it was one of those stopgaps. It was never meant to be a long-term solution. We've always been about, hey, we're neutral, we're independent. My viewpoint is always that we've carved out our own niche, that it did not exist before we came around. And we've grown our niche, and we've been able to do it because we haven't affiliated with anybody. So I've been very careful and particular about that. We don't take sides, that we're kind of Switzerland, especially in health and nutrition. Right. It's almost like religion and politics. People take their stuff very seriously.
Well, let me ask you that then. When I go and I search for fish oil, for example, the first two results on Google are WebMD and Wikipedia. When you say that you don't really have any competition, aren't WebMD and Wikipedia your main competitors?
Yeah, I mean, you could say Wikipedia is a form of competition, as is WebMD. The way we've angled ourselves, though, is that WebMD is very consumer-facing. It's very simplistic. Wikipedia is actually a lot better than most people give credit to, but again, it's very simplistic, and you don't know who's, especially in health and nutrition, right? You kind of want to know who is contributing to these websites, who's giving this information. So you can go to the fish oil page for WebMD, you can go to the fish oil page for Wikipedia, and then you compare it to our page, which I think has like 700 references. We squished them. That is the honest truth. Like, we're the elephant, they're the gnat, and we have crushed them. Now, have we crushed them in the eyes of Google? Perhaps not. Right? WebMD's been around since the early 90s. We've actually had it was actually interesting. An MBA student actually told us how he showed our site to his professor. And his professor actually compared us to WebMD, saying that our origins are reminding him of how WebMD started. Huh. So are we competing with them? Sure, but we don't treat them as competition. They've got their own entire, their supplement side is not their primary aspect, whereas it is for us.
Right.
And we just signed a few deals to license our content into textbooks.
Oh, wow.
So once we are heavy into textbooks and academia and, again, corporate and pharmaceuticals and whatnot, like, that's our goal, and that's not what WebMD does. So that's why we don't really treat them as a competitor.
On October 8th, 2012, just over a year ago, you wrote that your traffic at Examine.com was about 100,000 to 125,000 visitors per month. Yeah. And it was graduating from fun hobby to serious hobby.
That's right.
What did you mean by that? Fun hobby to serious hobby?
All right. So at that time, that's when I said, okay, it's time to put in actual effort. So my generic day before, let's say, serious hobby time was, I'd wake up whenever I wake up. I'd mess around. I'd read sports. I'd watch TV for the first couple of hours. Then maybe I'd answer some emails. Then maybe I'd put in some development time. And then I get distracted. I might work on it a little bit late at night, whatnot. My schedule nowadays is pretty much I'm up by, let's say, now I'm up by like 8:39. Walk my dog for, let's say, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. So by 9:30, I'm standing at my desk. At which point I work till roughly 11:30, maybe 12. And it's just pure focus, right? We're getting all the emails out of the way, any Facebook posts, anything like we have to do for the day, we're going to get it done. After that, I take like an hour break, then another hour of serious work, then a half-hour nap. That's very important. Then another hour of work, and then I'm done for the day. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of work or a lot of effort, but we're talking about pure, like how many people can claim that they get 3-4 hours of pure unadulterated work in? So that's what I meant by serious hobby, where no more distractions, right? So I work with 3 monitors, and I have my IMs and my emails and all those open in separate monitors. But in the time that I'm working, I'm focusing on the monitor in front of me, which could be a business development deal, which could be, specking out what are we doing next. We've hired a lot of people in the past few months. It's also figuring out, who to hire, what are their qualifications. Testing them is very important, right? And we can't, it's not just say, hey, what is your experience? It's more, okay, explain the NRF2 pathway to us, right? And explain in a way that conveys that they know the information, but not that it's too technical. So that's what I meant by graduating to a serious hobby. Right now, that is a full-time job to me, is that much of focus, much of effort. And then the idea is that by the end of next year, I'll be able to remove myself from the process again, where, again, it graduates really, again, from serious hobby to, fun business kind of way of doing it.
So how do you, I can't even fathom having a venture that's growing as quickly as examine.com and only spending 4 hours a day working on it. Like, it takes me 2 hours just to get through my email and social media in the morning. And then if I really lock I like to do coding. I don't do a lot of it, but if I lock myself down and think about it, like, that's an hour that's gone like that. And then, I take another look at email and I have some more customer inquiries coming in. You're selling a supplements guide now that I want to find out about. And I'm sure you get a lot of inquiries that come in, or requests for more information, or somebody sends you an email and wants to license part of your website for their textbook, or even just interviewing people. That takes like a week worth of work just to interview and get through all of the resumes and things like that. How do you make it how is it manageable within only 4 hours a day?
It feels like you're on a deadline. When you were in university or in high school, you had to do a paper, you had a week, but you wait till the last day, and then you just focus and you got it done. That's my perspective, is that I've got 4 hours a day, and if I waste an hour, then, it's almost like, holy shit, I've only now got 3 hours left in the day. So I've just been able, and the other thing is it's balanced too, though, right? I know at 12, I'm going to watch a TV show, or I'm going to read about sports. I know I'm going to have time to read about NBA, all that kind of stuff. So I have that all kind of there for me. The other thing I do is I take Fridays off. Fridays are my reading days. So any article that I come across that's interesting, be it psychological, be it supplement news, whatnot, I'll put it away for Friday, right? So Friday, let's say from 9 to 4, all I do is read. I read sports. I read essays on this. I read essays on that. So I know that I'm going to have time to do this. I know that I'm putting it off at a time when I'm going to get it done.
Yeah.
And I feel like that helps me focus. Now, in regards to emails and all that kind of stuff, I check email when I check email. And if I have a reason to check email, I'll check it and I'll deal with it. I am a very fast typer. I type at 140 words per minute. I feel like that helps me get rid of emails when they come. I'm not a person who reads an email and deals with it later. If I read an email, I'm going to answer it then. I have unread emails in my inbox. I know that drives some people crazy. For me, that just means that that's my task list. I'm going to get to it when I can. And the other thing is, I've now got a team around me, which is part of the graduating, right, is now they deal with it, right? So if anybody contacts me about supplements, right, it will then be forwarded immediately to Curtis. It'll go off to, now we have an entire team actually, right, and someone who's in charge of all that. So it's just one of those things that, eventually you find people who are tasked with dealing with this, with dealing with this, with dealing with this. And when you mention, licensing, that is my job now, right? Business development, as far as I'm concerned, is my job. Email in that context is my job, right? So specking out version 6 as we're coming out with is important, and I need a few hours, and I put it aside, and I do it. But emails and business development, you could say, is my job. So hopefully by the end of next year, when that's all I'm doing, that takes an hour a day, maybe, and then I'm good, right? And then I can deal with that emails tomorrow. That's the other thing, right? People forget that. If you answer an email in 3 days, it's not the end of the world, unless someone says it's urgent or it is like, they'll mark it entitled urgent. Then, you don't have to worry about answering it immediately. You don't need that instant gratification. So, yes.
Hey, let me ask you, because I often come across, I'm a big in-print reader. So if I get a magazine and I want to read something, like I'll tear out the page and I'll create a stack of things that I want to read, like you do on Fridays, that you dedicate Fridays to. When you're coming across things online, maybe it's a link to a nutrition article or supplements or something, how do you collect all those articles that you want to read so that you can go through them on your Friday off?
Oh, I just throw them in Evernote. So my Evernote's on my notebook, it's on my phone, it's on my main computer. I come across anything, copy, paste, close tab, done. Like I'll read the headline if it looks interesting, or if someone linked to it and said this is interesting or this interesting. Like I won't even bother reading it, because once you start reading, then you're kind of skimming and you kind of want to get it in. I'm just like, I've got my Fridays for that. It's not the end of the world. I'm a big fan of like habit change, that you do 30 days at a time, whatever, and you'll notice that most of what we do is quite inconsequential, even in terms of overall life, not even just business. So if I read an article on Friday and I miss the opportunity to respond, so be it. And if I do need to respond, I've got enough people around me that they will harass me, or I've got my inner circle that I trust, and they'll say, hey, for example, there was this is now 6 months old. There was a study that showed, hey, taking fish oil increases your chance of prostate cancer. So we got hit by like 8 different people messaging me like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? So at that time, that's when I go, okay, now it's gone from I'm going to read this whenever to I need to now look into this and we might need to respond. And I responded, and that generated like 20, or I didn't respond, but we responded, that generated 20,000 new visitors to our site. So stuff like that, right? There's also, I love using the phrase throwing weight around. I've reached the level with my business that we can throw weight around, right? Like I'm on, so for example, I'm on Arnold Schwarzenegger's advisory board, right? So if someone, wants a favor out of me, or they say, hey, can you help me out with this? I can throw my weight around and I can do that. And so now whenever there's a supplement study that comes out, or Dr. Oz says something ridiculous or whatnot, I don't even have to go seeking it out anymore. People will come to me, and it's a nice position to be in. And you thank them, right? And then people want to help you out more. They want to let you know when stuff like this happens. So it's a nice mutually beneficial cycle.
All right, I want to ask you how your business model has changed, but you just mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger. How did you get to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger, and how are you on his advisory panel?
I'm not exactly sure. So one of the advisors on forexamine.com is one of his lead advisors for his fitness and whatnot. And we were asked to do some articles on his site for protein, for sleep, for supplementation, stuff like that. And so based on that, when they started asking me about supplements and they want to know more about this, and he did a recent deal with Muscle Farm, where it's the first time he's actually endorsed a supplement company and whatnot like that. So it was just one of those, one thing led to another, led into another. And the other thing is also, I'm a very big fan of politics. Like I keep abreast with what's going on with politics, whereas most people in fitness don't care about politics, or I don't want to be mean and generalize, but they tend to be slightly not very knowledgeable about what's going on, right? They'll hear one viewpoint and then boom, their Facebook wall or whatever is covered in that.
Sure.
So I love reading about politics. So that also kind of made me on really good terms with this entire team and whatnot, was that I wasn't just, hey, I know fitness, hey, I know supplements, hey, I know nutrition. It's, hey, I understand what Arnold was able to do while he was in office. I understand the challenges he faced and the issues he had. And, one of his famous political stories was there was some legislator who upheld one of the bills that Arnold wanted to get passed. And so when he got one of his bills passed, Arnold vetoed it. But if you read the letter, the first letter of each, there's 2 paragraphs, and basically the first, it basically spelled out "fuck you," using the first letter of each line, and like that kind of stuff I knew, and I laughed and I thought it was hilarious. Whereas most people in fitness would not know that, because it's one of those stupid stories, right, that doesn't get necessarily a lot of press, but political junkies would know. So
right.
that got me along really well with the team, and it kind of just it went from there.
Very cool. So how has we talked about the business model originally being lots of great content. When you had a section on creatine or vitamin B or vitamin C or whatever, you made comments around a referral link to Amazon that said, we're not endorsing any specific brand. Here's a link to Amazon if you want to buy vitamin C, for example. And then you'd make your commissions off of any sales that were made as a result of that link. But you changed that at some point. What point did you change it, and what was it changed to?
So I would say I was, so about 6 months ago, we realized that, as we evolved and as our research changed, there was a big demand for raw information on, when I was talking about glutamine in the muscle cell versus the actual human body, there was a lot of demand for, hey, what are the actual results for studies done in the human body? So we created something, and again, worst branding name ever was Supplement Goals Reference Guide with a hyphen between supplement and goals. But the idea was that we went after personal trainers. We identified our niche, personal trainers and people who are very into the science of nutrition and whatnot. And we said, hey, we have maybe 300 plus supplements covered, and we have 200 plus health goals, which could be your blood sugar levels, it could be your blood pressure, it could be anxiety, your memory, your bone health, whatnot. And you can now look up every single study that we've analyzed, and we have demographic information and whatnot. And you can say, hey, vitamin D, what are the health goals that are affected by vitamin D and in what way? Mm-hmm. Or, hey, I'm concerned about my blood sugar. What supplements will actually make a difference and which are not a waste of my money, right? Because a lot of them are a waste of your money. And so we also made it, so you could see the supplement effect. Is it a minor effect, or is it actually a notable effect? So stuff like that. So it's this huge reference guide. I think it's like 920 pages long now. It's not something you're supposed to read. It's supposed to be something you look up as a reference, right? And so we started selling that in July, end of July. And so right now we're at almost 7,500 copies sold.
Wow.
And so that has given us the revenue base to, first of all, finally eliminate Amazon. And now we have enough funds that we've, again, aggressively hired, aggressively grown. And we have a few other products lined up for, let's say, next year, but none of them, let's say, are concrete at this time.
And how much do you sell the supplements guide for, Sol?
We sell it for $40.
$40. 7,500 copies sold at $40. That's a lot of money.
There's a decent chunk of change, yes. But I'm very proud to say that, like, Curtis even took very little. I basically took nothing. And all of it has gone into hiring and expanding. When people that know me will say that, I'm very excited about Examine.com, and it's not for the monetary reasons or whatever. It's that, that glutamine mentioned that I said, right? $600 million industry. That's $550 million of waste. Mm-hmm. And being able to look back, hopefully in 5 to 10 years, and say we changed the supplement game, we made it for a lot better. Because here's the thing, right? There's a lot of money being wasted on supplements, and so there's a reputation that supplements are useless. But there's a lot of supplements that are actually quite potent and that actually work, right? So when I talk about blood sugar, berberine, for example, is really, really good. You talk about IBS, peppermint oil can help with your IBS. For females that have got PCOS, right, inositol can help with that. So there's all these supplements that work in very specific cases. Are there general health supplements? Not really. But are there at least 50 supplements that work for 50 health goals? Absolutely. And if we can look back in 5 to 10 years and say we changed the game and now supplements are used in a targeted manner, which is what we kind of espouse, that would be awesome. And so, yeah, we made a chunk of change through our reference guide. But at the end of the day, even when you do that math for that, it's not a lot of money. It's not a lot of money to have an entire team conducting research, expanding this kind of stuff. And you don't just have a team conducting research, right? You need people who have knowledge. You need people who are well credentialed, who know what they're doing, right? Like, so a PhD, people see PhD versus master's. A big part of that is that you learn a lot about statistics. You learn a lot about methodology. You learn about a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with the subject matter necessarily that you're studying, but it gives you this broad depth and understanding of research and how it's conducted and what its flaws are and what its positives are. And so, you need this entire base of people from different areas too. right? So when we expanded, we hired a PharmaD, which is pharmacy doctor. We hired a PhD in biomedical. We hired a PhD in nutrition who also has an MPH, which is a Master's in Public Health Administration. So he has a very macro view on how nutrition supplementation affects people's lives. And we also have a doctor that's working on our team too, right? And he specializes in bariatrics, which is obesity, right? So you have now these people with this great swath of information, and you need funding, you need revenue to be able to build it out, right? So it's more of a means to an end.
So all of those people are on your staff part-time or full-time contributing to examine.com?
We have some that are part-time depending on what we need, and we have some that are full-time. So 3 of them you could say are full-time and 3 of them are part-time.
Wow. So just in the past 6 months alone, you've made about $300,000 in the sale of the Supplements Goals reference guide that you've plowed back into the business to hire people, to expand the staff, to bring on your chief technology officer so you're not doing the coding as much. And do you see sales of the reference guide continuing to grow, or is it at a stable level where you get the same amount of purchases per month going forward?
I'd say it's stable with a bit of growth. So when you mentioned October 2012, you said when this became a serious hobby, and we're at 150,000 visitors, I think. So we're now at 450,000 visitors a month. So we're like 15,000 a day, right? So we've grown a bit, and we're continuing to grow. And we get more mentions in magazines and all that. So my viewpoint is, revenue is growing in a stable. I mean, it's, we're talking about like, let's say 3% growth a month or 5% growth a month. Nothing spectacular, but it's definitely leaning upwards.
Yeah.
As V6 comes out, as we hired a copy editor who's involved in, cleaning up our English, which is just one of our weaknesses, So it's become more professional as we start developing. So this is kind of the process also now. Now that's going from a serious hobby to, let's say, a fun business. Part of it is that you have to start instituting a lot of standards, right? So we have to have a writing guide, a standard of writing. We have to have a design standard that, the entire team knows about, so they understand why, what is where, right? So stuff like that. So all of that requires funding. All of that requires money. And so, yes, that 300 grand that we were able to generate goes right back into that. But then there's so many more positive effects that eventually, it would also generate more revenue and all that kind of stuff. So we're firmly in the black, but it's, again, it's more towards a future goal than saying, hey, we're in the black, we're making money now, congratulations.
Yeah. Are you taking any money out of examine.com right now, Sol?
No, I think maybe I took 1,000 out of last month, but not really. Again, to me, as long as I'm not having to sink more money into it, I'm glad. And so again, that money we made, it went into what I'm calling a kitty, right? So it's there. So as we expand, or as some opportunity arises or whatnot, or I have to travel somewhere, let's say to Europe, or Curtis does, or other guys have to, we have that base of money sitting there. Yeah. So no, I haven't really taken
the Supplement Goals reference guide, this 900-page PDF that you created.
Yeah.
Does most of the information in that PDF come from the website? How much of it is new that's not contained on the website?
It's extracted from the databases of the website. So is it accessible? Sure, I guess. Like you kind of have to. So the health goals and all that is not on the website, right?
Okay.
So you can, like, it's equivalent. Let's say, well, we'll take you 10 seconds with a PDF. We'll take you 20 minutes on the website. So is it possible? Yes, but you have to kind of piece it together yourself. So yeah.
Gotcha. So the health guide, the health goals aren't on the website, but you can, in a way that's referenceable, like the PDF, but you could find it if you were
you kind of reverse engineering. It's not like we try to make it obnoxious. It's just we haven't built that into it. So if you want to find information, you kind of have to reverse engineer. You have to search for all the pages that talk about a specific health goal, see what we have to say, and kind of ascertain through that.
Gotcha. So basically, you took the content, you made it more user-friendly, you put it in an entire document that people can access via their tablet while they're at the gym or in a nutrition consultation or something, and you're selling it for $40 a piece. Do you think that the price point, and you're selling hundreds, if not over 1,000 copies per month, is the price point correct at 40? Do you think you're underselling it because you want to get more sales? Is it high for people that you're targeting, these nutritionists?
I don't think it's high at all. It likely is on the lower end. I've been around in the fitness business now for long enough that I know that we're definitely a lot cheaper than most people are selling, especially for the amount of effort and research we put into it.
Yeah.
So there's two sides. One is that, yeah, it's targeted to a very technical audience. So it's kind of middling logic where it's low price, but we specifically did low because we're targeting a specific audience. We're targeting trainers, we're targeting nutritionists, and you can go on Twitter and you can search, and every day some nutritionist or trainer saying, this is an amazing guide, amazing reference, which is awesome, very humbling, but there's a target audience.
Right.
So eventually, yeah, we likely will come out with a more consumer-friendly version. It'll likely be a binded book. It'll likely be rewritten from scratch, and it likely will be more expensive, likely 50, 60, maybe even higher. But again, that's one of those not set in stones. The reason we also went with 40 is that in terms of business, you definitely don't want to put your price too low, right? Everything has expectations, right? And so when we say, hey, we've got 3 PhDs and 2 medical doctors and all this behind this, and then we're selling it at $20 a piece, right? Like we might be able to generate more revenue in the short term and all that, but eventually when we want to sell more stuff, or we want to sell more higher end stuff, right? We've kind of dragged our price lower than it should be. And so that's why I thought, like, from even a little bit of testing, like $40, $39, let's say, right, was more of a nice spot for us. So we're far enough from 50 that people are kind of impulsively buying, but it's high enough price that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot for the future.
Gotcha. When I excuse me, you can hear that I have a little cough too. So when I go to examine.com and I look, your reference guide is smack dab on every single page. You're promoting it, and then you've got all the content on there. And when you click on that link, it takes you to a sales page for the reference guide. It's a long form sales page, classic long form. It goes down. It's got phenomenal PhDs, doctors, brands that are recommending it. It goes on and on and on.
Absolutely.
You're a long form fan.
I'm a pragmatic man, and I'm again driven by numbers. Long form outsold short form, and at the end of the day, again, right, it's a means to an end of revenue to getting more people. Mm-hmm. So do I like long form sales myself? Not really. Did I get a few complaints? Absolutely. But in the long term, does it matter? Not really, again. So
you created a long form and a short form. You tested them against each other, and the long form sold more.
Absolutely. We've tested it. We've tested out the language on the button. We've tested out where to put the buttons. We've even tested out colors, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely, yeah. So gotcha. Long form did win out, yes. All
right. And when I go to click the buy button, it takes me to a page, and I can either pay by PayPal or pay by credit card. When I click credit card, this cool little pop-up comes onto the screen. What processor are you using for taking credit card information?
So we're using Stripe, and they're absolutely brilliant. They have made taking credit cards so much easier. I put them at the level of companies like Twilio, who made VoIP so much easier, SMSing and text messaging and phone calls, all that. Their thing is simple, stupid. Like literally, it took me maybe an hour's worth of effort to get it working. It's super easy. So yeah, we use Stripe. They of course let you do a lot more. And again, in V6, we're going to implement a lot more stuff, like subscription stuff and whatnot. But we use the most simplistic version. It doesn't even ask for your address and whatnot. So, and that's part of it though, right? Is that you have to, conversion rate matters, right? The RPU, revenue per user, is, let's say, your master. And so, yeah, we tested it out, and that's why we use specifically the PayPal icon instead of pay with PayPal button. That's why we have those PayPal images on the bottom and all that. So yeah.
So when somebody makes a purchase on Stripe or by PayPal, it routes them back to your website with some sort of confirmation that the payment has been received. Do you allow people to just download it right there? Do you email them the PDF? How does that work?
So one thing we did in order to improve conversions, which did increase customer service a little bit, is that you can pay with never having created an account.
Okay.
So once we have your money, then we can deal with your account and all that kind of stuff. That's easy, right? So you go, you pay, and then it says, hey, to download it, you need to create an account. So do you want to log into an existing account, or do you want to register a new one? And once they do, basically, yeah, they can download it whenever they want. We didn't DRM it. I didn't put any effort into that. Honestly, it's one of those things where, you may save 2 cents per dollar here, but then there's the inconvenience. Then you have to watermark everything, and it's it adds so much overhead and effort, especially for a $40 product. Are we going to sue people? Like, that's not what we would do, right? So it just, yeah, it was just a straight up PDF. One of the things that we do protect ourselves indirectly is because it's updated every day. Even if it goes on torrents, it becomes outdated the next day. So because we're conducting research, like we're adding new research every day, right? So the value also in it, and it's a lifetime payment, lifetime access. The value of it also is that you get these huge list of updates that are going to happen. So if you want to torrent, go ahead, but you'll be outdated within the day.
Do you automatically build a PDF on queue every night?
Absolutely, we have processes that generate the PDF for us.
Does it put the date at the bottom? So if somebody torrents it, it says, January 16th, 2011?
That was one of the ones where we had internal discussions. We said, if you put the date and there's value in it in terms of getting it updated and all that, but instead we just wanted to leave it blank. We wanted to just kind of leave it empty, just where, if someone's torrenting, the other thing too is, right, if you're torrenting, you have to make sure the files match. So if the dates are not off, stuff like that, it's just they can even screw it up. And people do screw up torrents. We've actually found a few screwed up ones. So, no effort in terms of fixing that up.
What's your refund rate for your 30-day 100% satisfaction guarantee?
I think it's like 1.1%.
1%. So for every 1,000 orders you get,
and maybe
10.
like 12. Yeah. It's pretty low. Again, I think part of the value is, because it's updated every day. Even if you get the refund, you become outdated. So there's that value that, okay, I'm sinking in $40 with these guys, but they've been around for almost 3 years. Everyone says nice things about them. So, we feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. Very cool. And so I know a lot of people are really concerned about putting information into a PDF and then selling it, because then so-and-so health trainer is going to share it with the 5 other people that work at their gym. And how do you get over the fact that people are going to copy it? Or what makes you feel like people are going to be truthful and honest in purchasing the product and only using it for their personal use?
Honestly, again, it's pragmatism, right? So we can't really control what they do. I mean, we can add locks and all these other headaches. But at the end of the day, if they want to share it, they're going to share it. From our perspective, again, I mentioned this before, but the lifetime updates is nice because, they'll have to continually reshare it. The other side is, our brand, going back to the domain and all that, right? So now our fans are called Examination, right? It's a nice little pun and all that. Our fans are big fans of what we do, right? We get a lot of traffic. We get a lot of new people who have never heard of us before, who will then come across our site and see all the information we have and all that. So at the end of the day, you can't get away from marketing. You can't get away from acquiring new customers. Yeah. And we're getting enough. We're getting so many that, again, worrying and stressing out about someone sharing this document, or it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been involved in fitness launches that have generated $500,000 in their first 1 week. And again, I mean, these guys are even less sophisticated in a lot of ways than us. They just have a zip file that's publicly accessible. You can literally right-click and share that zip file with everybody you want. Whereas in ours, at least you have to be logged in, and it streams the PDF through our site. So there's no endpoint for you to send to anybody else to download it. But again, right, they're still making $500,000 off 1 week. They're still making millions of dollars a year. And if you're stressing out about one guy sharing with 5 people, then you need to kind of think bigger. Is what I would say. Even if you lose 5%, if you're making $1 million, you lose 5%. That sucks. But otherwise you're making $1,000 and you're not losing your 5%. Who cares, right? So, I mean, it's just you got to be pragmatic.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. $40 seems like a no-brainer if you're in the health space. Here's a document that's going to help you do your job, be more intelligent, help your customers. Why not make it a yearly recurring fee? So people can try it for a year. If they don't like it, they cancel. If they like it, they continue to pay for updates.
That's one thing we considered. But again, this is almost an example of prototyping also.
Okay.
Was we want to get it out, we want to get some revenue, and we want to be able to move away from Amazon. So one of our next planned things is going to be a high-end roundtable discussion. Where we'll spend a couple $100 per panelist to bring in a doctor of this, an expert in this, and then have them talk about the discussion. It'll be like $30-40 a month, which is not a cheap amount for what is basically 60 to 90 minutes of audio plus a guide and all that. But this was again was to get our foot in the door, was to say, hey, we are the man about supplements, right? So since we've launched this, we've grown a lot, we've generated a lot of revenue. Could we have made more? Absolutely. But am I disappointed with where we're not? No, right? Again, it's that pragmatism where people get so stuck with this idealism of they could have made $1 million and you made only 300, like, oh, shucks, right? But in 5 years, what's the effect of what I've done, right? I've got 7,000 plus people who have paid me $40 who are now, using our reference guide. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook all the time. If you use any of those tracking sites, put them, at least you'll get a dozen mentions every day about someone saying how we like Examine, how the guide is amazing. So yeah, maybe we made a little less money directly, but indirectly, our word of mouth is stronger than ever. When you have the editors-in-chief of Muscle and Fitness, of Men's Health, of all the other magazines saying Examine.com is awesome, right? You just wonder, how did you get there? Right. I mean, one of my favorite examples actually is I went to a Toronto seminar. I met up with this guy who lives in Edmonton. We did a guest post for him on Fish Oil because, again, I met him. This guy retweeted that link from him. I started talking to him. He eventually became our advisor. And because of him is why I'm on Arnold Schwarzenegger's advisory board, right? So this entire, and it's a direct sequence, right? So what are the chances that I would have met that guy from Edmonton if I hadn't gone to that event? What are the chances, that guy would have retweeted that link because he had never heard of us before, right? And he was a former editor of Men's Health, and so we've been mentioned in Men's Fitness, so we've been mentioned in Men's Fitness and Men's Health. So there's all these indirect consequences of people putting their own word of mouth and reputation on the line, right? They're not just saying, hey, look at this. They say, this is awesome, or I love this, or this is fantastic. So, building that brand, we have 16, 17,000 Facebook likes, which is not that much, but it's something, it's a lot more than most people in fitness, right? Yeah. So again, more of a long-term pragmatic view instead of how much money can I make today and tomorrow.
Gotcha. And are people recommending and overtly suggesting that other people check out Examine.com to buy the reference guide, or just because the online resources are so thorough and useful?
Well, honestly, both. I mean, yeah, the majority of it is, hey, check out Examine it, check out Examine.com. All these, let's say, fitness. Fitness especially is very individual based. There's very few brands per se. There's, let's use Nick Mitchell, right? He's got like 50,000 Twitter followers. He's a big name in fitness, right? And you have Ollie Foster. You have like 50, 100, 200 different people who've all got 10,000 plus followers on Twitter. And, people are invested in their specific brands, their specific sayings. So they'll tweet at them and say, hey, what about creatine? And their response will not be, this is what I think, this is what I think. They'll say, go to Examine.com. So yeah, we've reached that level where everyone and anyone mentions us or recommends us. And yeah, there are people who will buy our guide who will say, hey, this guide is amazing, or hey, this is the best $40. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to see on Twitter someone saying best $40 I spent on a nutrition, or I saved $100 on supplements just because of this thing. And then yeah, you can, again, I love tracking, right? So you can track someone clicked on it and bought it, even though Twitter is like the worst way to sell anything. But yeah, people will still convert that way.
All right, we're coming up on an hour and a half, Sol. This has been a phenomenal interview. I've got a bunch of other questions. I'm gonna boil it down to two. I want to ask you about your advisory panel, and I want to ask you about social media and newsletters. So let me end with the advisory panel, and I'll ask you about social media. So clearly, you've got a website up. You're generating a lot of traffic via Google. I can see on Alexa.com sends you a ton of traffic, even though when you build businesses, you don't want to build them for Google traffic, because Google can change their algorithm and make you fall off a cliff. You're on Reddit, you're on Facebook. A lot of third-party websites like bodybuilding.com will link to your content because it's so good. How do you encourage, what is your social process? What is your marketing process to get more people talking about it? Do you have a newsletter that goes out regularly? Do you rely completely on Facebook and Twitter? Is Reddit your key?
Advisory board. That sounds like a social media question. This is, okay, sorry, continue.
I'm going to end with advisory.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you get more people to the website other than search engine optimization.
Right. So Google is actually like 50% of our traffic. And which is not that much considering, most big sites generate a lot of traffic on Google. From our context, and actually this kind of goes back to the advisory board. I'm not a shy person, and you always hear from haters. Basically, is kind of the saying, but you don't ever hear from the other side.
Right.
And so I always made it my mission, even before I even started exam, or it was even an idea in my head, was, hey, I read this article and I found it very interesting, so I send them an email and I'd say, hey, I've been on the internet for a long time, so I know you always hear from haters. I just wanted to say I really liked your post on, thoracic mobility or whatnot, right? And they'd file it away in their head, or they say thanks and whatever, and that was the end of that, right? So that was one way kind of I got to know people indirectly, directly, and it's very honest, right? I mean, I never went looking for a fight, and I'd only send an email if I thought what you wrote was very interesting.
Right.
The other thing was, we've always shared things. I've been a very long time Reddit user. I've been on it for 7+ years. I'm dog years with Reddit and whatnot. So anytime I'd come across these interesting articles, I'd also submit them to Reddit, or I'd post them on my Facebook or on our Facebook page and all that, or share it on Twitter. Like, I come from the tech industry, and the tech industry tends to be very happy to share, very happy to tweet, very happy to Facebook, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of brought that mindset over to fitness, whereas in fitness there's always fiefdoms, or even in most businesses, right? There's fiefdoms who are very controlling, or they'll send a tweet out and they'll email you as they've done you a huge favor saying, hey, I tweeted a link to you. It's like, thank you, what do you want me to say, right? It's just there's like, as they're owing you favors, or you owe them now. So I was always like, I find this interesting. This is why I'm looking to it. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying it's the right thing. It's the wrong thing. I thought this was interesting in my head, or it made me think. So that was always a process I had, or we still have. And again, now we've just reached a level where we can throw waiter out. Whenever there's a study, people come asking us. So every time we post on Facebook, we get like 5 or 10 shares. We generate 500 to a couple thousand clicks without any effort now. So I feel like that's how we got there in the first place. And the last thing is, we were unique, right? There's no one else like us. Like, the content you'll find on Fish Oil, you won't find anywhere else. You won't find research on vitamin D, amalgamate, and collating. That purple cow thing that Seth Godin kind of says and all that. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. And in this case, we're all purple cow, right? If you are in research, and we get the nicest fan mails all the time, and fan mails which sound so important, self-important, all that. But we get the nicest emails and messages from people saying, "Hey, I randomly ran into your website. I'm a doctor. I'm studying nutrition, or this and this, and I love what you guys are doing. And I just wanted to say, keep up the good work." So we've established ourselves enough that, and we built up something enough over time that information is so good and so different and so useful that people like kind of to share what we're doing. And that's what I was saying again, right? Like on Facebook and Twitter, it's not me hunting people down. It's not me searching for the keyword crates and then answering everybody. It's just people like what we do, and they're happy to spread the word. And we make their life easier.
Right. And you have no newsletter.
So we do have a newsletter.
You do.
But it is completely hidden, and it is one of the biggest undeveloped things we've done, I will admit. It's like we still have like 10, 12,000 emails, but you have to dig for it to find it.
I couldn't find it.
Exactly, right? So it's a little bit hidden, and you're like, whoa, there's a newsletter here. And we get maybe like 10, 15 emails a day, and every time there's a spike, a spike up to 50 or 100 or whatever. So newsletter, I send out like a newsletter once every 6 to 8 weeks. I'm absolutely terrible. I mean, and I say this in a very bad way, I should be doing a better job. The idea is I now have people who will do better jobs once the process is in place and all that. But yeah, newsletter is by far, well, so when we did a sale recently, like 2-3 weeks ago. Actually, we were like, hey, we've hired all these people. Here's a quick 60-hour sale. And so I tracked every single form of social media. And email was definitely by far the best conversion and all that kind of stuff. But Facebook was very underrated. It actually did really well. It did not convert as good as email. But because there's so much Facebook traffic from your fan page and all that, that it was a very profitable source of revenue. Twitter was an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. What a waste of time.
Wow.
But
and did you buy premium placement on Facebook and Twitter so you exposed it more, or did you just post on your feed?
No, on Twitter we didn't. This was right before they opened it up to everybody because we're a Canadian business. It wasn't available to us. On Facebook we did a few sponsored posts, but we didn't do anything heavy.
Yeah.
maybe, $100 or $200, which again, since we have 16,000 fans, is not that much, right, for exposure. But no, just even the likes, just the shares, people liking what we did, liking what we do, people excited that, hey, they've got more people researching. Like we made a connection that we started selling this, let's say 100 days ago. We have spent that money to grow the website to make it better for you. We're not, drinking our Mai Tais on the beach or whatever. We have spent the money back into making this website even better. And people really responded to that in a very positive manner.
What
And
was the
so,
60-hour sales, Saul? What did you sell it for?
oh, we just knocked $10 off.
$10 off.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let me finish it up with the advisory board, Saul. So you mentioned a couple times that you have an advisory board that opened up other opportunities for you to be on Arnold Schwarzenegger's advisory panel. I didn't remember seeing any of that on the website. So my question is, who's on the advisory panel? How many people? And how are they compensated for their time? And what are those responsibilities that they contribute?
Right. So our advisory board is listed on our About page.
Okay.
So our About page is basically what do we do, who our editors are, like an entire team, and then who is on our advisory board. Mm-hmm. Our advisory board was basically a collection of people that I was talking and asking for help anyway. Like I said, I wasn't shy, and so I would email XYZ. I love meeting people. Everyone's got the really interesting stories once you get a chance to dig into it and all that, right? So these are people I was talking to anyway. And when, again, we started becoming, let's say, more serious hobby kind of situation, it was important to have people that I could publicly say, are people that we look up to and people that we ask questions. We don't compensate them at all. Their only compensation per se is that they're mentioned on examine.com. Mm-hmm. And it's awesome, again, that we're at such a level that once a week I get some MD or some PhD emailing me saying, hey, I'd love to be on your advisory board. So there is again, it kind of goes back into, it's very cliche, build value, purple cow, all that kind of stuff. But we built up something really interesting. We built up something really awesome. And I think 8 advisors. I think 5 of them are on no other sites, no other advisory boards. They were on it because, one, they trusted who I am. They trusted what I'm building. They trust Curtis's research, and they love what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where they came from. And in terms of, I haven't actually used them much in terms of business development. I've used them more as a sounding board. At any given time, I can email them and say, hey, I have a question. What do you think about this? And, we have a few, Brian Chung, for example, he's a PhD and an MD, and he's a peer reviewer and journalist, so he knows about science, right? When we talk about being pedantic, and I say this in the most heartfelt way, we put a word wrong, he will come after us, we'll fix it, right? Peter Wolf, same thing. He's postdoc MIT, postdoc Harvard, very well qualified people who know their research. On the other hand, you have someone like Lou Schuler, who's former editor in Men's Health, who's a writer who writes books, right? So I ask him a lot about, how do we make ourselves more friendly? And at times I ask a very open-ended question, but most of the time it's very specific questions. I go, hey, what grade level should we attempt for our summaries versus our complete summary, right? That's a very specific question. He can answer that's of his skill set, right? And then he can say, hey, this. It's basically having free consultants, whenever you need them. Now, I don't abuse them because that's not what the relationship's about. And it's a relationship, right? They'll ask me for some information, or they'll ask me, I'm not well known, but a lot of people in the fitness industry know that I'm more technically competent than almost anyone else in fitness, right? I have an appreciation of, let's say, content distribution networks and DNS and hosting and all that kind of stuff that most people don't. So anytime they have a question, it's a two-way street. Mm-hmm. So I also give them value where anytime they have a supplement question, Curtis will, knock it out of the park for them. He will put in the extra effort for them. Anytime they have any technical or anything I can help with, or anyone I know or anything like that, right, they can ask me and I will help them. So it's definitely a two-way street. And so the latest example, again, is the V6. We had 5, 6 specific questions I've sent around to people, so I send them to my advisory board, right? And again, they all come from different audiences, which I think is really important, right? So we have the researchers, we have the administrators, we have the writers, all these different people have different skill sets. So when they responded, I had this nice mosaic of what should we do for our next version when we go, legitimate kind of situation.
Makes sense. All right, so this is the part of the show where I ask the audience to take 30 seconds and reach out to you and say thank you. Don't be just a hater. Take a moment to say thank you to you, because you came on here, you gave us an hour and a half. It was a phenomenal discussion, walking us through not only your history and how you were able to come up with the idea and build examine.com, but how you made it a reality by bringing on Curtis, by developing the software, by working in incrementally, by adding to it over time. So I urge the audience, click on the link under the video, say thank you to Sol on Twitter. There's a link on the left-hand side of the screen and just underneath the video. They are on Twitter at ExamineCom. They're also on Facebook at ExamineCom. Sol, if someone, is shy, but they want to send you a thank you email, is there an email address that they can send you an email directly to?
So this is one of my ways. I usually don't put I don't put my email publicly. I always put it through system process. But if you go to examine.com and you go to the contact page and you fill it out, I will see it.
All right. Sounds great. You can do that. But I urge everybody who's watching to do something. The first step in creating a relationship is to start a conversation. This is giving you an excuse to do that. Sol has mentioned that he does that whenever he reads something that's useful. He'll send an email to the author, and I think it's that easy to start that conversation.
Oh, so easy. When you're not looking for something, it's so easy, right? When you're just saying, "Hey, I thought what you wrote was interesting."
Done. Yeah. Sol Orwell, director of Entropia.com and publisher of Examine.com. Thank you for coming on the Domain Sherpa Show, sharing your expertise with domain names and development, and thanks for being a Domain Sherpa.
Oh, it was absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.